2023 has been officially named International Year of Millets by the United Nations General Assembly. You would find that in efforts of alleviating poverty and eradicating hunger, the government of Zimbabwe, through the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development, has been emphasizing on the production and cultivation of traditional grains. Now, when we talk of traditional grains, we are talking of finger millet, sorghum, pearl millet, to mention but a few, which is the case today. We are going to be looking at sorghum production and sorghum establishment here in Goromonzi. To discuss this and more, I've taken the liberty of inviting Wendy Matashu Madzura. She is an agronomist who is working in our farming community to ensure that farmers remain viable in their enterprises. The name of the program is Agricultural New Directions Agribusiness, in support of Vision 2030, where we equip the Zimbabwean farmer with knowledge to do with production economics, business finance, time value of money, to mention but a few, so that they remain viable and profitable in their entities. Wendy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Wadza. Always a pleasure.
As I have mentioned earlier, the name of our program is Agribusiness. This is where we talk about money, how to be profitable and viable in your agriculture enterprise as a farmer. As we get into our discussion, what is the importance of establishing or cultivating or producing sorghum in Zimbabwe for our farming community?
In a bid to mitigate the effects of climate change and to promote crop diversity, like you have rightfully alluded to, as is being pushed for by the Minister of Agriculture, we need to encourage our farmers to diversify in terms of their product portfolio. We need to diversify and spread risk by growing other crops. So these crops that include the millets, your sorghum, which fall under the traditional crops basket, are crops of choice because they are also drought tolerant, they are very nutritional in terms of their value that they provide, and nowadays people are moving towards being more health conscious in terms of their eating habits.
Yes.
So the consumption of sorghum, the consumption of millets, the consumption of all these other crops that were previously shunned or not grown extensively has increased. So in a bid for us to match that and also become profitable, it means if you're going to grow more small grains, there is a value implication that you're going to get. It's lucrative in terms of the business. Even looking at the producer prices that were released, millets have a favorable and a lucrative return if produced correctly and if high yields are achieved.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was very detailed. I like that you highlighted several issues. You spoke of health eating habits, whereby people are shifting from maybe snacks and unhealthy foods to support their health system. You also highlighted on issues to do with spreading your risk as a farmer, diversity, making sure that you curb uncertainties that might come with climate change or dry spells. Speaking of dry spells, generally you would find that here in Zimbabwe, most of our farmers have a tendency of wanting to extend the planting period or the establishment period. They want to cut corners. They always want to come in through the back door to ensure that they remain in the business. Even if late January, you would find some people coming with maize or even tobacco trying to establish it. Can you maybe speak and emphasize on planting periods, maybe for future years or seasons to come after this one for our farming community?
Thank you so much, Wadza. That's a very pertinent question. You know the importance of catching the planting window. We can never overemphasize it, because if you don't catch the planting window in this season, it means even in the recurring seasons, you will be affected. Maybe you want to come in with your wheat, you want to come in with your winter vegetables, you won't be able to catch the next planting window. And then there is a ripple effect that continues if you don't plant on time.
Yes.
So in terms of farming being a business, also in business, planning is important. You need to know and understand the ideal or critical periods that you are recommended to establish a particular crop. Looking at a crop like sorghum, you find that sorghum needs to be established from end of November, December into early January.
Yes.
But you find that given the changes in climate that we have been experiencing over the past 2 seasons, farmers have gotten away with planting even mid-20s, in the 20s of this
of January.
Farmers have managed to get harvest even after planting mid to late January. This is because of the extended rains that we tend to get. But it doesn't mean that if you got them last season, you will get them this season. But this year, we are being told by the Meteorological Services Department that we are having a normal to above normal season, which is to say chances are there that the rains will extend. But we don't want to encourage bad practices. So as our farmers also plan and think about the future cropping seasons, they need to know that if they want to do sorghum in the coming season, it needs to be planted from end of November to early January until mid-January. That is the window that we know that it's going to give them very high yield.
Okay, finally, Wendy, as we round off this segment in a snippet, can you talk briefly in terms of the cost effectiveness of producing traditional grains, given that irrigation can be very costly for farmers, whilst encouraging them to uptake the production of traditional grains?
Thank you. So you know that the issue that profitability is also speaks to the cost structure of a farmer.
Yes.
Whereby if you are going to increase your production costs, it also eats into your bottom line, which is your profitability. So a crop like sorghum has a low input cost in the sense that in terms of the fertilizers that you're going to use, the basal fertilizers, you might not need a higher amount of fertilizer as compared to what you would need when you're doing maize. Maybe you're going to need between 3 to around 6, you will need between 3 to 6 bags of compound fertilizer if you're looking at your standard 7-14-7. If they are the blends, then you will need slightly less. Then in terms of top dressing, you will range between 4 to around 6 bags of fertilizer. Those are 50 kg bags that you're going to require of your AN or your urea. The other thing is that with your small grains or traditional grains, you find that the establishment of the crop itself is also cost effective, because in terms of the inputs that you are going to require, the seed, you will need 10 kgs per hectare, whereas other crops will need 25 to 100 kgs to establish 1 hectare. So with traditional grains, you can establish them at 7 to 10 kgs per hectare. Then you come in with your thinning, as we are going to demonstrate later on in the program.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was very detailed. Now, Zimbabwe, you'd find that generally not most farmers or many farmers are producing these traditional grains, which is why we emphasize on business etiquette here and on agribusiness. You need to understand the various techniques that you need to employ to ensure that you are viable, even certain crops that you need to incorporate at your farm so that you diversify and spread your risk. We're going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in the second segment. Stay tuned. Thank you, Zimbabwe, for staying tuned to Agricultural New Directions Agribusiness, a platform where we discuss business fundamentals in the agricultural fraternity here in Zimbabwe. This is where we equip each other in the farming community with business, finance, production, economics, time value of money to ensure that we are profitable and we are contributing to the GDP of our country as farmers here in Zimbabwe. Now, viewers, today we are looking at sorghum establishment for those farmers who are in the final lap, those farmers who are at the final touches to ensure that as a country we also have a section where we produce the traditional grains. Now, viewers, we encourage you to be a part of these conversations. Feel free to get in touch with the producer Wadzanai Manyore. It's on 0772 807 506. Alternatively, you can like our Facebook page, Agribusiness with Wadzanai, make a follow-up on this episode and more, and leave your comments and suggestions on our YouTube channel. It's Agribusiness with Wadzanai. We are also now available on Twitter, where most of these conversations take place. It's at Agribusiness 110. Wendy, we are here in the second segment of our program. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Wadza.
Now, Wendy, behind us there are some activities taking place. We are preparing to take our tractor and the planter to the field. Before you touch on that or include that in this discussion, I also want you to highlight on the different varieties or the different types of sorghum that we have here in Zimbabwe.
In Zimbabwe, Wadza, you know, traditional grains are usually shunned away from being thought of as crops that are grown only by small-scale farmers.
Yes.
So I want to demystify that notion as we begin to explain the types of sorghum that we have. Why? Because you find that we have the red sorghum and the white sorghum varieties. Looking at the red sorghum varieties, they are also grown for beer brewing, which is to say you can even grow them under contract and you can get very high and lucrative returns where you can sell to all those who are going to be producing beer. The white sorghum varieties that we have are also suitable for consumption, which is to say in terms of also increasing the nutritional value of your diet. You can include the small or traditional grains. Why? Because they have very high protein content of around 12%, and you find that there are micro elements that are also available that include your iron, your calcium, and all the other micro elements that would add value in terms of the nutritional value for a family. So we want to encourage our farmers to grow sorghum. The red sorghum being aligned to beer brewing, while the white sorghum varieties would also align for consumption for both livestock and for human consumption. So these are crops of choice, and they also mitigate in terms of the risk of failing in crop production because they are drought-tolerant crops.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Now moving along, Wendy, you would find that in crop production, there are certain things and even events that might eat into our profits or even the yields. We are talking of pests and diseases. Most of our Zimbabwean farmers have a love-hate relationship with cropping because of pests and diseases. Can you maybe touch briefly on those pests and diseases which are a nuisance specifically to sorghum production?
In sorghum production, as is the case for any other crop, a farmer needs to plan in advance and know the problematic insect pests and diseases that they are most likely to face. So with that in mind, it brings us to the whole concept of employing good agronomic practices, which not only start from the management of insect pests per se, but it also starts even from the seed rate, the land preparation that you're going to do, and as well in terms of the weed control from the early establishment stages of your crop. Here we find that when you're establishing sorghum, for example, the seed rate that you need to use will range from 7 to around 10 kgs per hectare, but we recommend 10 kgs per hectare to be sure, so that you can also come in with thinning if there is need for you to thin and remain at the desired plant population that will range at around 300 to 350,000 plants per hectare. So you also need to stand guided by those.
Okay.
In terms of the other things that include your weed management, like any other crop, weed pressure will suffocate the crop and it will add to low productivity and low yields. So you need to make sure that you have a weed-free field from establishment right through to harvesting. The tricky part is that it's a cereal. It being a cereal, there are very few agrochemicals that are there that will select and kill the weeds in sorghum if they are grasses and leave the sorghum. So there are a wider option of products that are available for broadleaf weeds as opposed to grasses. So in this case, you're going to find that the farmer, after planting, because they have a few weeds, grass weeds that are in their field that are green and active, they will come in with glyphosate or Roundup to make sure that it goes into the system and kills right through to the root system, so that they won't have those grass weeds being a nuisance in the sorghum crop. They'll then come in at a later stage with a post-emergent application of products that kill broadleaves that include atrazine, amongst other products, guided by their rotation plan. In terms of insect pest management, like most other cereals that we have, sorghum is also sensitive to the armyworm. It's sensitive to the stalk borers. It's also sensitive to a wide range of other soil-borne insects that include cutworm and white grubs, particularly if there is organic matter in the soil. So if you know the problematic insect pests, you are guided accordingly. So the secret in farming is for a farmer to be able to scout regularly in their field in a systematic way, for them to be able to determine whether or not there are problematic insect pests that have infested the field. Don't just scout outside. Get inside the field, move to the center, and check for the problematic insect pests so that you get the correct chemical. On those agrochemicals, you need also to know that there are different trade names of different products on the market. But if you don't know your active ingredient, you end up buying 4 or 5 different products that have the same active ingredient, which defeats the purpose. So you need to interchange agrochemicals when you're using it.
That was very detailed, Wendy. You spoke of pertinent issues surrounding being diligent as a farmer. You need to scout, you need to understand the active ingredients in your pesticides or insecticides, or else you end up purchasing 5 items that serve the same purpose, which is very uneconomic as a farmer, given that you want to cut costs. Finally, Wendy, we are concluding this segment. I want us to talk about fertilization, the fertilizer regimen, and even the intervals in which you would advise our farmers to apply, given that with incessant rainfalls comes leaching as well. So maybe you can enlighten us in terms of the rates and even the intervals of fertilizer application.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, especially considering the season that we are having, where we are having persistent rains. So we find that in terms of the basal fertilizer, at planting, there's no other way of doing it. A basal fertilizer, as the name suggests, needs to be at the base of the crop, so that the crop can utilize it at the early stages of establishment, after which we can come in with our top dressing fertilizers. So for the basal fertilizer, the rate can range from 4 to 6 bags of fertilizer which is to say you are looking at around 200 to around 300 kgs of your 7-14-7. But if you are going to be using the cereal blend 6-23-23 or the double D 14-28-14, it means you need to adjust accordingly. But the best way for you to know the rate of fertilizer for any farming program is to analyze the soil. We continue to emphasize the importance of doing soil analysis. It might be late now for these crops that have been established, but we don't end there in terms of planning. We are already planning for the next season.
Yes.
So for the next season, you need to do your soil analysis on time. Do it in winter, soon after you harvest. But when you do your winter plow, you come in with your corrective measures, be it lime, be it single superphosphate, or whichever other fertilizer is required. So we continue to emphasize the importance of soil analysis. But our farmers, they are used to these general recommendations.
Yes.
We need to just give them. So for the basal fertilizer, it ranges from 4 to 6 bags per hectare of 7-14-7, depending on the fertilizer being used. Then for the top dressing fertilizer, you can apply between 4 to around 8.5 kgs of fertilizer, top dressing, depending on the type you're using and the soil type as well. Where you find that for sandy soils, you might need more as compared to the clay soils. But we want our fertilizers to be applied, guided by the conditions that are prevailing. If it's raining persistently, like what we are seeing now, that you can get 70 millimeters of rainfall in a few hours, our farmers are encouraged to split apply their top dressing fertilizer. This also helps them to reduce the risk of leaching.
Yes.
Because if the fertilizer is leached, already you have applied it and you have incurred costs, which means you are eating into the bottom line, the profit that we were referring to. So if it's AN, which tends to leach, apply it in different splits, especially in sandy soils. But if you're also going to be applying your urea, which tends to dissolve immediately if the soil conditions are very wet, or if it rains immediately after, you can just apply on the surface. But if it doesn't rain immediately after, or if there are no signs of rain and you want to apply your urea, you can cover it slightly so that it's not lost into the atmosphere through volatilization.
Yes.
So these are some of the critical things that our farmers need to observe. Then in conclusion, there is talk of foliar fertilizer application, where we want our farmers to also be encouraged to check on the label in terms of the nutrient constitution of whatever fertilizer they're going to be applying. You don't want to buy the fancy name when in essence there is no nutritional value in the product that you're applying. So if it's a foliar fertilizer, make sure that you are checking in terms of the NPK that is there, which is the macro elements, and the trace elements that you're applying to your crop. And is your crop designed to feed significantly through the leaves? Food for thought. If it is, then you need to be coming in cumulatively at regular intervals to make sure that you meet the nutrient requirement of the crop.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was very detailed. I would like to believe that farmers, we were taking notes. And just to emphasize on what Wendy was saying, you need to be diligent. We are now speaking to that aspect of being thorough as a farmer. You need to scout, you need to understand the active ingredients, and you also need to have a good working relationship with the agronomist and not just go for fancy names. I've heard that this is a foliar fertilizer. Does your crop benefit more through its foliars or through its leaves, or you need to apply the traditional, the granular fertilizer? We are going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in the third and final segment. Stay tuned. Thank you, Zimbabwe, for staying tuned to Agricultural New Directions, Agribusiness, in support of Vision 2030. Now, if you look at United Nations Agenda Vision 2030, we have Sustainable Development Goal 1 and 2, speaking of alleviation of poverty and eradication of hunger, respectively. Today, we are looking at traditional grains establishment, traditional grains cultivation or production. Earlier on, I was joined by an agronomist, Wendy Madzura, who was enlightening us on the technical side as our technical support on how to establish your sorghum, given that we are headed towards the end. Zvanguva zvevarimi vaakungoita zvekuvhara kupendera kurimwa kudyarwa kwemapfunde. Pane dzino nguva ndatora chikamu chino kudaidza Taurai Jevinari, murimi mukuru ari kurima achishanda nemadhumeni akasiyana siyana munyika yedu kuitira kuti nyika yedu idye igute. Taurai ndinokuchingamidza pachirongwa. Tichipinda munyaya yedu yedzekurimwa idzi, Taurai, you are a commercial farmer. Urimi mukuru waya vanonzi commercial farmer. Unoona kuti munyaya dzekurima commercial farmers akawanda haasununguki kuuya kumapfunde vanoti ndezve small scale farmer ndezve subsistence farmer. Iwosa commercial farmer, chakakutuma kana chakakuinspire kupinda munyaya dzekurimwa kwemapfunde ndechipi?
Ndinotenda vazanai nekundikoka muchirongwa ichi. Chekutanga chakandipinza mukurima sorghum inyaya yekuti atingasiye minda ichirarira. 2 haidhuri kurima, inoda fertilizer shoma kana iyo mbeu yacho yakati chipei, plus hatishandise mishonga yakawanda neprice yacho yakaiswa negovernment inobhadhara kuda kuenzana nechibage.
Uye ndinobva ndada kutotibva tatoemphasize panyaya yemadiridziro aya maclimate smart varieties aya haanei neirrigation. Munyaya dzekurima unoona kuti varimi vakawanda vanodyirwa maprofits avo nenyaya yekuti vanenge vashandisa magetsi kana dhiziri kuti vapombe mvura yekudiridzira, which is not the case nesorghum kana matraditional grains edu. Tichipinda takadaro zvakare, taurai sekutaura kwandamboita, you are a commercial farmer, murimi mukuru vaya vanonzi ma-A2 farmers. Ungatitaurawo here dzimwe mpesa dzaunorima, mamwe mabasa ako munyaya dzekurima zvirimwa chete here, kumuka muriko futi zvakare here? Ndezvipi zvimwe zvamuri kuita? Ndiri kutoona patakamira pano, takamira pamushina mukuru unene planta, kuseruko kune rimwe tarakita riri kuita land preparation. Saka sa commercial farmer ndezvipi zvimwe zvauri kuita kuitira kuti urambe uri munyaya dzekurima idzi?
Muwinter torima wheat, like last season tatine 100 hectares. Torima futi seed maize, commercial maize, soya beans, sugar beans. Seguro rino tinenge tichasvika 350 hectares.
Chibage.
Zvese chibage, soya, mapfunde neseed maize.
Alright, taurai mukupendera chirongwa, ndoda kuti upe vakatarira chirongwa mafarmers ari kuonawo kurudziro panyaya dzekurimwa idzi. Unoona vamwe vanenge vachita apa mukurima hakuna mari, zvinoda mari stereki, but yaunozowana hapana. Kurudziro yaungaita semunhu agara mubhizimusi iri zvakamirawo sei zvaungataurira vana veZimbabwe maererano nekurima tichisimudzira hurumende yedu?
Zvandingavakurudzire pari panyaya dzekurima idzi, vanhu ngavasanyeverera kuti hazvina mari. Nekuti ini ndakatokurirawo muno mapurazi handisina chanani nacho, but nekurima ne4 years ratanga kurima takakwanisa kutotenga equipment yedu yekurima nayo. Zvinhu zvedu zvikutofamba. Kana iwe mhuri tokwanisa kuchengeta vana, kutendesa vana kuchikoro. Ndine vashandi about 25 mapermanent vanotokwanisa kuwana mari vachitochengetawo mhuri yavo.
Right, taurai wataurawo kuti une vashandi 25. Uri kushandisa futi mishina kurakidza kuti pane mechanization iripo apa. Zvakanakira kushandiswa kwemishina ndezvipi? Nekuti vashandi 25 havangadzisimudzika 350 dzauri kutaura. Kurova kuti iwe une mishina yawinayo. Zvakanakira mushina ndezvipi pamabasa akaita se-commercial farming?
Zvakanakira mushini sepano patiri panapa, kudyara sorghum tinokwanisa kudyara 15 to 20 hectares pazuva nemushini. Asi tikatora vanhu togona kudyara 2 hectares chete kana 1 hectare.
Pamwe nevanhu 50.
Vanhu 100 kana vanhu 50. Tokwanisa kudyara 5 hectares, 3 hectares. But nemushini yotodyara 15 to 20 hectares pazuva.
Alright. Ndinotenda zvikuru taurai nekutitendera kuuya papurazi rako tichiona mashandiro auri kuita, tichiona kudyarwa kwesorghum.
Tinokutendai nekuuya kuzotiona.
Thank you so much. There you heard it, viewers. On that note, we have come to the end of this week's edition. We're looking at Sorghum establishment. I was joined by our technical support, Wendima Tashu Madzura, and I also had our farmer coming in, explaining and expressing himself in terms of how he is undertaking his operations. From me, your host, Wadzanai Manyore, I'm also on Instagram. It's a W Manyore, and the crew behind the scenes. Have yourselves a fabulous evening. Thank you for watching.